أنا حاليا ببيروت
Okay.
لأنه ما فينا الإنترنت بالجنوب هلا ما فينا so
Yeah. Allah is still.
oh we're live. Welcome everyone.
Welcome. Shall we go right ahead, or do you want to wait a couple minutes? Okay. So welcome everyone. This is the second installment of Archives and Heritage for Palestine with our very, very special guest, who's an abulhawa. I'm very happy to have you here joining us today. This is a year-long series hosted by Dr. Jamila Ghaddar, as well as myself, Tam Rayan. The series responds to the urgent need to act in solidarity with Palestinian colleagues and institutions in Palestine and the Shatat, the diaspora, to safeguard the heritage, the history and memory of the Palestinian people under settler colonialism and genocide. Through education and advocacy, we work to surface, connect, amplify, and promote ongoing efforts by Palestinians and supporters in the archives and heritage sectors. Before we begin today, I would like us all to take a moment of silence. It's the 9th month of Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. The official death toll stands at 39,289 Palestinians killed. However, a recent study that was published in The Lancet estimates that a more correct number would be 186,000, considering those still trapped under the rubble, the remains of loved ones unable to be identified, and those killed due to indirect violence such as starvation and trauma. The estimated 39,289 Palestinians killed is likely conservative. As well, more than half of Gaza's homes have been destroyed or damaged, and Israel has damaged 80% of commercial facilities, 88% of school buildings, 65% of roads, 267 places of worship. Gaza's health infrastructure has been utterly devastated. On top of all this, Israel is destroying every monument to Palestinian history, every archive, every library, every university, every piece of cultural and historical heritage in Gaza. I would like to remind everyone that this is not a unique moment of brutality limited to Gaza or this moment. Israel's existence has always been hinged on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and Palestinians. So let us take a moment to reflect on all that has been lost. Thank you all for sharing that moment of silence with me. As well, I would like to also offer a land acknowledgement. I am located in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in the United States, at the University of Michigan. I want to acknowledge the university's origins, which were obtained through an 1817 land transfer from the Anishinaabe, the Three Fires people, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi. I also acknowledge that the university stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands that were obtained in unconscionable ways from Indigenous people. So I encourage you all to reflect on whose land you are right now, wherever you are. I want to also take the time to say thank you to our sponsors, which are the Middle East Librarians Association, the Archives and Heritage for Palestine Advocacy Subgroup, as well as the American University of Beirut's Palestine Land Studies Center, Publishers for Palestine, and the Archives and Digital Media Lab. We're also sponsored by the Lebanese Library Association, CUNY's Archival Technologies Lab, Library Freedom, We Here, and Uproot. So thank you to all of you. I'd like to introduce myself and Jamila. I can go first. I'm Tam Rayan. I'm doing my PhD at the University of Michigan at the School of Information, specializing in archives and digital curation. I received my master's in information and a master's in ethnomusicology from the University of Toronto, so I'm originally from Canada. But I am Palestinian heritage. My research is focused broadly on how to better represent diaspora groups in archives, focusing specifically on Palestinians in diaspora and how they're archiving themselves under ongoing Zionist erasure. And then I'll turn it over to Jamila.
Thank you very much, Tam. It's a great honor to be here with you, Susan. Thank you very much for being with us today. I'm coming to you from Beirut in Lebanon. Although my own university, I'm an assistant professor in archives and information science at Dalhousie University, which is on the land of the Mi'kmaq, subject to the peace and friendship treaties, and also very much occupied land, like the rest of Turtle Island. Right before we start, just to add in terms of the work of the series, which is really about organizing and working in solidarity as part of that education, but also at our first event with the great Dr. Salman Abu Sitta about a month ago, we issued a statement. And I'm here to remind all of you out there that you still have the opportunity to sign the statement. It's a call to archive against genocide, archivists and memory workers in solidarity with Palestine and Palestinian colleagues. We have well over 500 signatures from archivists and archival scholars from all over the world, as well as allied memory workers and supporters. This is a statement that was issued June 1st at our first event by members of Documentary Nakba, a reading group for archival liberation in and beyond Palestine. That was co-convened by myself and Dr. James Lowry from Connie. We're going to put that link in the chat. We're going to remind you throughout the event, and we're going to ask you to share it on all your networks, wherever they might be. We're very keen to have this being an ongoing way that we can connect with people as well. So you'll start getting events and notices from us as part of signing the statement. You can also watch it being read live during the recording by members of the reading group during the recording of that first event on June 5th. And I'm going to just hand it back to Tam to start us off with the event itself.
Sure. So thank you, Jamila. The event, this is basically a Q&A with Susan, and it's a wonderful opportunity to get to hear her speak more about the extensive writing that she's done. What we've prepared is a series of quotations from her very extensive writing, which spans articles, books, and essays about Palestine to ground our discussion about the role of cultural and memory workers in preserving Palestinian history identity, as well as resisting ongoing censorship when it comes to speaking out and advocating for Palestine. But before we get to that, I would like to formally introduce you to Susan abulhawa. She is a Palestinian novelist, a poet, an activist, the founder of Playgrounds for Palestine, the director of the Palestine Rights Literature Festival. Her debut novel, Mornings in Jenin, was an international bestseller and was translated into 32 different languages. The reach and sales of this novel made her the most widely read Palestinian author in the world. Her subsequent novels, The Blue Between Sky and Water and Against the Loveless World, were also bestsellers and received critical literary acclaim. Since the start of the genocide, Susan was able to make 2 trips to Gaza, first for 2 weeks in February to March, then April to May. And she has written extensively about the horrors she witnessed there. So welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you, Tam. Thank you, Jamila, for having me. Before we start, if I can, I want to make a slight correction to the numbers that you mentioned earlier, the 39,000 plus. That's not even, I'm sure you saw the Lancet that gave a conservative estimate of 186,000. But that is also a gross estimation. I don't know if you saw my electronic intifada article. It was a mini study that I did. It was published 10 days before the Lancet study. And the estimates, and everybody can see how I arrived at those estimates, was a range between 193,248 to 514,000 plus. So the numbers are many fold that stagnant number of 39,000. So I just want to put that out there. It's anybody who's been there, any of the physicians, anybody who's been to Gaza knows hundreds of people are dying every day. And now in that number, the number of people dying every day keeps increasing as hunger increases, as the lack of medication increases, as the spread of diseases increase. So I think when the dust settles, at least 20% of the population in Gaza will have been murdered. So I just wanted to, I think it's important to have that correction.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. And thank you for that correction. Any official death toll should not be trusted as a true death toll right now. And we will never know the real number, to be honest. It's always going to be higher. There's always going to be those unidentified. So thank you for making that correction. With that, I would like to start with our first question and quotation. So this quotation we pulled from actually a different electronic intifada essay that you wrote called "History Will Record That Israel Committed a Genocide." This was earlier in this year that she wrote this. And the quote is, "Genocide isn't just mass murder. It is intentional erasure of histories, of memories, books, and culture, erasure of potential in a land, erasure of hope in and for a place. Erasure is the impetus for destroying homes, schools, places of worship, hospitals, libraries, cultural centers, recreational centers, and universities," end quote. So you wrote these words recently after visiting Gaza twice during the ongoing genocide. Could you tell us more about this experience, and why is history intentionally targeted alongside the ethnic cleansing of people and their infrastructures? And how can we begin to understand what this experience of being erased does to people, human beings, Palestinians?
So I think extermination is threatened by memory. It's threatened by archives, which is why preserving memory and preserving archives and preserving cultural productions is a form of resistance. For example, when in the 1800s, when they discovered gold in the West, United States, removing the indigenous people of the land required not only their physical extermination, but they also perverted or erased important monuments. The most notable of which is the Black Hills that people call Mount Rushmore. They were the five grandfathers, the eight grandfathers, and the American political establishment understood the sacredness and the attachment of the land and the memory associated with the Black Hills. And so they carved the faces of, four white men into them. So this sort of either outright theft and destruction, when you cannot steal and destroy something like a whole mountain range, you appropriate it somehow. And Israel has been doing this from the very beginning. The erasure of names, for example, of Palestinian villages. Like, we are so connected. Our entire culture really springs from the land and our interaction with the land, and certainly with the naming of our villages. So one of the first things that Israel did was to change the names. And they weren't very creative, so they just sort of used the existing name and sort of Hebraized it a little bit, changed it. Destruction of libraries. I mean, that was another thing that they did, was to steal all of our books. There's a really great documentary called The Great Book Robbery that documents Israel's wholesale confiscation and theft of Palestinian libraries in 1948, both public and private libraries. The destruction. So every time that, when Israel is sort of building new settlements or new any kind of building, they very frequently come across archaeological sites, and they sort of search for any kind of Jewish artifacts, and when they don't find them, they destroy these these archaeological sites that are part of our memory. They're part of our history and part of our ancestral legacy in the land. One of the things that white settlers did to Indigenous Americans was to kill off the buffalo. That served a dual purpose of erasing cultural and attachment to the land and the land's resources, and also to destroy their livelihoods and their ability to feed themselves and clothe themselves and to be self-sufficient, because the buffalo were such an important part. And the parallel to that in Israel's case is the destruction of the olive trees. I mean, it's systematic. Our orchards and our olive trees in particular have been decimated, and they're continued to be decimated on a regular basis, whether it's through official appropriation or settler violence and fires and cutting down trees and so forth. In addition to, banning a lot of our culinary traditions that involved foraging for food, whether it's like, foraging for wild zatat, foraging for akub, and all these other herbs and plants that are part of our tradition and are part of our, our rootedness in the land. So this is the kind of, it's murder and erasure, because, you can kill somebody, but, extricating their roots from the land requires extricating memory. And which is, that gets us into the whole, this idea that they can kill Hamas or kill an idea or kill our desire to resist occupation and whatnot. We don't die when our bodies die, because we are, we're a whole people who are rooted in the land. We didn't just arrive in Palestine yesterday or a decade ago or even 100 years ago. Our roots are very deep. They span millennia. They span all of recorded history, conquests, pilgrimages. I mean, revolutions. It's, we are rooted in that land, like all peoples are rooted in their ancestral lands, and removing us is quite a large task. But they have been, they've done a lot of damage, and nothing will bring back all these archaeological places, sites that they have destroyed. Nothing will bring back the libraries that they have burned. There was that beautiful Byzantine mosaic that in Gaza that was discovered a couple decades ago that Israel decimated this time. I mean, there's so much that they're targeting that involves our roots.
Well, I was about to ask you about how censorship plays a role in all this. It's certainly something you've experienced a lot. And now I'm being told by our fabulous tech team that YouTube has actually not allowed us to post a comment with your quotation that we just read.
Wow.
We can we can share some. If we try to post it on YouTube, they'll try to stop that.
So that quote, it's that quote that genocide isn't that's what they objected to? That's incredible.
That is correct. So we're going to do our best to blitz it everywhere after the event and see what happens and keep you updated. But again, this is certainly not your first or anyone who's Palestinian, who's speaking about Palestine. Part of that eradication of memory and that connection with the land that you're speaking of is that silencing. One thing we had pulled, and certainly something we had all watched very closely as people who organized this event, is what happened with the Adelaide Writers' Week. That's just one example, but one that took quite a lot of press. I want to ask you to speak to that, and I'm going to pull out a quotation, and we're going to see how many of your quotes get through on YouTube. Let's see what happens. This is from your responding to the campaign to ban me from Adelaide Writers' Week, Mondowise 2023, and I quote, "We are not allowed to hate the colonizers who kill, maim, oppress, dispossess, expel, and rob us. We are allowed neither outrage nor rage in the public sphere. While the IOF and its rabid paramilitary settlers set our lives aflame, literally and figuratively, we are tone-policed, expected to engage in respectability politics, even sympathize with those who leave their privileged lives in their own countries to serve in a foreign colonial military with one of the worst human rights records in the world, all so that every Jewish person can have an extra country if they want." Unquote.
Yeah, so thank you, YouTube, for making the point. And Adelaide was that was in response to a specific criticism that was being leveled against me. There was an American Israeli soldier who had, he was a white guy from the United States, had gone to Palestine, became a soldier, engaged in God knows what kind of criminal activities or war crimes and murder of Palestinians. And he was, and then he went back to Palestine and was killed. And my response was, good riddance to human garbage. And I don't think, and so that quote was, oh, look, she's calling a poor boy, his parents are grieving, and she's calling him human garbage, and look how awful they are. And it's just, it's maddening to me. The amount of violence that we have been subjected to by Zionists. And the idea that, and the first thing we're always asked is, do you condemn this or do you condemn that? And we are supposed to be the perfect victims. We can't hate them. But I think we should, we do hate them. I hate them. I absolutely do. I hate anybody who is leaving their privileged white American lives to go to my country and oppress Palestinians who are teetering on the edge of life in everything, who are being quite literally erased from the world. And I think it's important not to mince words. And it's okay to hate them. It is the most natural reaction to do that. And I am not shy about saying that, and nobody should be, because it's just shocking the way that the world can look at this terror Palestinians have been forced to live under, this grinding oppression, day in and day out, kidnapped from your house in the middle of the night, your house demolished, you're humiliated at one checkpoint after another. You have no control over your lives, over your resources, over your destiny, over your education, over your employment, your finances. You have your water. You have control over nothing, because these people who come from other countries, who claim to be God's favorite, and claim to be superior in some ways, think that they should have a right to take what you belong to, and what has belonged to you for millennia. The idea that we have to acquiesce to this, that we have to approach this with reason, with compassion, is outrageous, and I don't think we should. I think it is the most natural reaction to have to have awful feelings about them, and I do. I wish nothing good for them. I really don't, and I don't want to be shy about saying that. We have every right to do that. We have every right to resist them in any way possible, and I can't say that enough. And I resent it when other Palestinians really bow to this, even though I understand why. I know the pressures that people come under. I get it. But this idea that we need to be the forgiving victims, we have to show compassion to people who have shown us no mercy, no compassion, no, not 1 ounce of humanity, but somehow we have to show them. And the kicker is that we do, right? Like, we go to great lengths to distinguish between Jews and Zionists, as do I. We go, Palestinians, even in Palestine, living under this horrible Israeli boot, will still show compassion. And we see that in the way that Hamas has been treating the captives. They all come out. They're treating them better than they treat themselves. And that's very clear from everything the Israeli captives have said. And you contrast that to what Israel is doing to our captives in their dungeons. They're being raped with hot metal rods, with electric sticks. They're being tortured and starved and beaten and crippled. And the unspeakable is happening to them, including being raped by dogs who are apparently trained to rape. I mean, the sadism and the amount of horror that they're inflicting on Palestinian bodies is frankly unspeakable and unimaginable. And despite that, our resistance continues to treat their captives with humanity and dignity. And I'm not sure they deserve it, frankly.
You spoke about this narrative that, Palestinians must be the perfect victim. They have to be the perfect martyr in order to, well, at the same time, Israel can commit the most atrocious human rights abuses. And at the same time, they're not held to the same standard. And this goes into the narrative that Israel has been able to cultivate over decades and decades that will always delegitimize anything that happens to a Palestinian. So the next quote goes into that a bit more. It's also from an Electronic Intifada article that she wrote last year in 2023. Palestine's resistance has already won in Gaza. And the quote is, Israel tried desperately to control the narrative in a series of fabrications that immediately unraveled, one after the other, in such ways that turned Israel's storied propaganda apparatus into the laughingstock of the century. Sensational lies about rape and beheaded babies were quietly retracted, despite being uncritically parroted by mainstream Western media. Israel tried to present sloppy evidence that Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City was used by Hamas fighters. Social media users promptly poked massive holes in the official narrative. forcing the Israeli military to delete the videos and replace them with even more foolish doctoring, end quote. So I'm wondering about the role that you may see in social media in countering Israel's narrative of the war, especially in this current moment, if you have any thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, social media has been immensely impactful in this moment, despite the enormous censorship. I mean, we all know, Israel has been colluding, or rather, Meta and social media outlets have been colluding with Israel to censor Palestinian voices, to limit the amount of information that gets out to the West, because controlling the narrative is just as important to them as exterminating us, and they have always sought to control the narrative, which includes painting Palestinians wholesale as violent, irrational, horrible people who just want to kill Jews. I mean, that image is embedded in the American imagination, because they have cultivated that for decades, through the media, through Hollywood movies, through books, songs, what have you, and they attempted to do that now, but social media is kind of a wild card. Meta, in particular, but also X, who by the way banned me from Twitter because of that comment that I said. I'm permanently suspended from that comment from Adelaide. But X and Meta have both basically done Israel's bidding in limiting Palestinian reach. So when they're not removing accounts outright, they're shadow banning us. But TikTok, I guess, was not as easily controlled, even though they actually did exert quite a bit of influence in removing Palestinian content. But in the early days, I think it's more successful now, but early on, it took a few months for them to really get to really suppress Palestinian content. But it was early on, it was not controlled enough, and that was enough to wake a sizable number of people up to the realities of Zionism, and which is why we see the big gap in opinions between young and old, with young people being squarely pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli colonialism, and the older generation that doesn't use TikTok being the opposite. So I think, social media has been invaluable, but at the same time, I say that with a healthy dose of caution, because it's also another avenue of misleading information and Zionist propaganda as well.
It seemed that YouTube also did not like some of the things you were talking about in that last quotation. So only some of it went through this time. We'll share all of that with you for
That's
sure.
amazing.
It's quite amazing. And it's
You
quite
see,
amazing.
this is proof. Like, they literally, this is an algorithm. I don't think there's anybody sitting there watching, right? This is an algorithm that they have created to automatically remove Palestinian content, automatically remove references to Israeli genocide, and you also, I'm sure you know that Meta just last week announced that they were going to remove posts referring to Zionists as anti-Semitic comments. So Zionism, which is a political movement that was formed at the turn of the century, is somehow an anti-Jewish. It's crazy.
Somehow protected.
Yeah.
I remember them trying to say, you can't attack someone, you can't say Israeli something soldier, like at the a nationality, your state is protected. But I think at the essence of it is really the struggle over memory, like you're saying, Susan. It's really about that erasure. And it's really quite remarkable that you can live stream your own genocide. There's something happening here that is both predictable and extraordinary. And I want to come back to, go ahead.
I want to jump in about something regarding memory and social media. I think there's this assumption that things that are on social media right now are going to be there. And I would like to, that's not the case. I think there's a real danger that a lot of this stuff is getting deleted and removed. And if it's not done now, it will be done in the future. So I think it's really incumbent on all of us to download as much as we can to archive everything that's being posted from Palestine on social media. That's a Herculean task, but I think it's really important to do that because this is such an extraordinary historic moment. And I believe the outcome of this is going to determine our fate as a species, really, for generations to come. And they will try to erase, they will try to bastardize and pervert the narrative. And it's really important that we have everything documented in our arsenal and downloaded. And it'll take a whole population to really do that and ensure that we all have these historic videos and documents and photos.
I mean, one tiny piece of good news amidst all this horror is that that is a project that's happening at the Palestine Land Studies Center that I've worked with Ghada Dimashq on, downloading web pages and social media and Telegram channels coming out of Gaza and Palestine. Right now, since it started in October that we did it, and there's now other universities in Ramallah, for example, picking it up because it is going to take a lot to capture all of it, which is impossible, actually. But as much of it as possible, as you're saying. And I think, that connection with the land is really important. One thing I've spoken a lot with people about is, yes, the Palestinian people have been on the land since time immemorial. No, these are settlers. There is this myth of prior habitation. This is something that your work speaks to so strongly, that connection to the land, that collectivity coming out of it. And Against the Loveless World, you talk about your 2019 novel, you talk about, and I quote, the continuity of these traditions help bridge the spaces between dislocation and the home I had forged in my birthright homeland. But I knew I could never again be complete in one place. This was what it meant to be exiled and disinherited, to straddle closed borders, never whole anywhere. To remain in one place meant tearing one's limb from one another. End quote. Wow. I know I already read that, but wow. Susan, there's things that are lost forever. You said that earlier. And there's things that remain. And I want to hear you share with us anything else you'd like about what it means to be disinherited, dispossessed in this way, and what the land means in this moment.
I think anybody who is exiled and disinherited can understand the sentiments of this quote. Edward Said, sorry, my dogs. Edward Said described it as, perpetually being out of place. We're not rodents or, house flies who can be dislocated from one place to another and thrive wherever. We are people with attachment to the land. Memory is what anchors us in the world. our traditions, our attachment to the past is really what anchors us. It's what defines us. It's what gives our lives meaning. It's what gives our societies its face, its outward facing appearance, right? Like, you have people, like, there are people in this country who have been here, you know, for a few hundred years, and they will still call themselves, I'm Italian American. They've never been to Italy. They can't name a single ancestor who came from Italy. They don't know where they're from Italy. They don't speak the language either, but they still define themselves as Italian American because there is this natural sort of quest for roots, to know who we are, to know our purpose, why we're here, what we're doing here. And when you come from a place like Palestine that is so rooted in it's a fabled land, it's really it's even more special, you know. And everything that is me, everything that was my mother, that was my grandmother, my father, and my grandparents before them, springs from that land. Our DNA is tied to this land. The food we eat is tied to the land. Our clothing, our tatriz, which was where that, you know, that quote was really talking about. The tatriz, that, like, it's a language. It's a sartorial language that's embroidered into the clothes we wear, that tells our stories. It tells everybody around us where we're from, what our story is, and the designs, the intricacies of these designs are based on the land itself. So people who come from the more coastal areas or the grasslands of Palestine have more of these sort of flower motifs that grow in that grow in those regions, whereas people from the West Bank area, where it's more hilly and stuff, will have different designs that are based on, you know, certain kinds of trees that grow in one place and don't in another. And so the patterns of our clothes speak of the land. And so when you have clothes that you've inherited from your grandmother, you're inheriting the land. When you inherit, like, you know, recipes, we don't do recipes. We don't like Westerners do. We eyeball it. But, you know, when you inherit ways of cooking, this is something that we know our mothers, going back generations and generations and generations, have been doing. That's special. That's who we are. And for somebody to come from Europe and say, oh, this is ours, and what they give you as proof is a DNA test that says they have 1% ancestry in this region. You know, that's like, what's her name? Elizabeth Warren deciding that she's indigenous because she did a DNA test and it showed she had an indigenous ancestor at some point in her life. It's absurd. It's absurd. And you know, these people who come, they bear no resemblance to anybody else in the region. They bear no historic relevance, no genetic relevance, no cultural relevance to the land or anything surrounding it. And then they'll tell you, oh, we're the rightful people of this land. It's galling. It's just, the injustice of it is so deep, and it is so wounding, and it is impossible to reconcile. You can't reconcile. You can either live your whole life fighting it, or you can accept it and feel the nothingness of that acceptance, and feel the hollowness and the pain of that acceptance. And you know, Palestinians have chosen not to accept that kind of injustice and that defeat, no matter how weak we are in the face of these behemoth military powers that are quite literally ganging up on a principally unarmed, defenseless indigenous population that's running from one place to another to avoid these raining bombs. You know, honestly, like, these past 10 months, I think they've altered all of our lives forever. But they've also, like, I've never been more proud to be Palestinian. I have never felt more proud, more resolute than I do now, watching honestly the resistance. They are heroic to me. I draw my inspiration from them. These young men who are literally confronting death, and in order for our children, for future generations, to get a taste of liberty. They are holed up underground. They have no food. They have no water. They're fighting a behemoth with, that has the most sophisticated death machines and surveillance machine the world has ever known. And they're doing it with epic bravery. And anytime I feel, just tired, I just think of them, and I'm inspired all over again.
Absolutely. And I think of how the Western media and Israeli Zionist media has demonized the resistance as, just pure terrorism. And they cut out the entire context of they're fighting for liberation. They're fighting for freedom. And they have done something that was never thought possible and was never expected. And they surpassed all of that to fight for what has been long denied Palestinians. So absolutely. I also think about what you were saying about that erasure, coming back to that, what you were speaking about how Israel has appropriated and denied Palestinian roots through culinary traditions, tatrees, and not just like as a whole, but like the variations between the different villages and the different regions. And it's not just Palestinian culture as like one monolith, but that we have so many varied variation between just Palestinians in our, like, as a culture. And I'm pulling a quote here from an essay that she wrote in an edited volume, Seeking Palestine, and your essay, Memories of an Un-Palestinian Story in a Can of Tuna. This was published in 2013, so some time ago. But I do love this essay because it's largely autobiographical, and you're telling the story of your childhood. And the quote that I pulled here is, "I was without papers, without a passport. I didn't belong anywhere but to a political discussion called the question of Palestine. I was an abstraction. I was nothing." So I think of that erasure that you were speaking to in this last question, and how Palestinians have been long reduced to just this question of Palestine. And I think of how over the past decades, Israel has tried so hard to erase the Palestinian. They reference us as just Arabs. They reference us as like just wandering tribes, all this propaganda, and to erase the fact that we have roots. So I wanted you to, if you could, elaborate on your writing practice and the nuance that writing brings to bringing more complex representations of Palestinians, and ones that are not simplistic or reductive of like Palestinians to the Palestine question or the refugee or anything like that.
First of all, thank you for pulling that quote. It was a long time ago, and I forgot that I wrote that, honestly, and certainly not. I mean, I remember the essay, and I know what it's about. It's my time when I lived in Jerusalem in the orphanage, but I forgot the actual verbiage, and it reminded me that line where I was nothing. I conducted these writing workshops when I was in Gaza, and one of the writers who never did turn in his submission, and I haven't been able to convince him to do it, his name is Ghassan. he wrote this really poignant, affecting story that happened to him when he was crouched, and his family had been murdered around him, and they could hear this baby crying. They couldn't reach the baby, and they were all trying to get to this mother and baby. They knew the mother was dead and the baby was crying, and there was this line in there where he's sort of, he's having this internal dialogue, and one of the lines was, I'm nothing. And so when you just read that, I'm like, wow, this is a recurring theme in our lives, in Palestinian lives. At some point, this is what the world thinks of us. And ultimately that's it. I mean, we see it. We see how cheap our blood is. We see how cheap our children are. I mean, they're, day in and day out, dismembered and burnt and beheaded, and limbless bodies, crushed bodies, shredded bodies of babies and children and mothers and fathers and elderly, and it's still happening. So the message we always get is that we are nothing, which is why, everything I do, and I know a lot of people think that I write for Westerners, that I write to convince the West of something or whatever. That's not true. I write for ourselves. I write for our kids. I write for our history. I write for my grandmother, for my ancestors. This is about us. And I deeply believe that we have to empower each other. And and really move away from this sort of Western-facing conversation, this Western-facing national conversation that we keep having. Ultimately, they are nothing. They are nothing. And because they are a moral vacuum in the end. And that's what they should be treated as. The fact that they have the money and they have the guns and whatnot is it doesn't matter, because that can be defeated with what we do have. And we do have roots. We have history. We have justice on our side. We have morality on our side. And this is why I think culture is so important, because our culture is an audit of this. Our culture and our heritage and our narrative is an audit of everything that I'm saying. And it's important for us to preserve it for our children, for future generations, and to honor our ancestors.
And the most profound way, there's no choice. It was never a choice that was given to fight or to disappear, to be eliminated. That's not even a choice. I want to remind everyone in this moment to please sign our statement in solidarity with people in Palestine, our call to archive against genocide. I'd also like to note, sadly, that somehow we're almost at the end of the event. I have no idea how. I feel like we just started. But I'm going to pull one last quotation for us today. And this is something that we talked a lot about at the organizing committee. When we were really getting excited about inviting you, Suzanne, and talking about what conversations we could have with you. It came up, often how this issue of writing victory into Palestinian future, present, and past, against defeatism, for hope, and that in itself being, in some ways, both a choice and not a choice at all. And also your novel, Against the Loveless World, you say, and I quote, "To survive by loving each other means to love our ancestors too. To know their pains, struggles, and joys. It means to love our collective memory, who we are, where we come from," You spoke just now a little bit about the ancestors, about love. Maybe what I could also ask you in reflecting on this quotation is whether in this moment there is anything you would like to say to the many archivists, librarians, and memory workers in the audience about what they can do to aid Palestinian collective memory.
Thank you for that. And I think that your work, the work of archivists, of the protectors of memory, in a way, you are the memory protectors, is vital for everything, for all the reasons that we've sort of talked about and delved into in this whole conversation. It is a preservation of our identity, of our roots, against people who are intentionally trying to extricate us from our memory, from the land from which that memory springs. And at the same time that they are erasing us, they are claiming our history, they're claiming our narrative as their own. This is an interesting thing about colonizers. Initially they were very explicit about colonizing the land. They had the Jewish Colonization Agency, as they called it. They spoke often about colonizing the land. And they also, like Jive Zabotinsky said, we must sweep the land of the Orient, basically to sort of get rid of to Europeanize, basically, to civilize the land and get rid of the Oriental traditions. But then, of course, the world changed and colonialism was not in vogue anymore and it wasn't acceptable. So suddenly they are an indigenous people fighting the original indigenous people. It's incredible. And so now they are, they find, the land is full of history and stone that speak, and they somehow pervert those stories and make them into some, ancient Israeli story of some sorts. And so I think archiving memory, archiving our stories, archiving our current collective history in the making is immensely important to resist both erasure and theft of narrative, as well as perversion of narrative, all of which are happening at the same time. And yeah, whether it's, and it's not just the archivists who do that. I think every Palestinian who picks up the art of tatriz, the practice of tatriz, is an archivist, is preserving memory, is a memory worker. Every person who writes a story, every person who journals every day, every person who in Palestine who continues our foraging culinary traditions, who continues our agricultural traditions, who writes songs, who continues, dancing debke lines. I mean, all of these are active preservation of memory.
Every time we say Palestine, every time we
eat a watermelon. Did you hear? That's the latest thing they're claiming. They're saying, oh, watermelon is Israeli, which is like...
Okay, all right. Simmer down, everyone. That's pretty wild. Sadly, we are drawing to a close. I just wanted to offer you, Susan, if there's anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye today.
No, thank you for having me, both of you. I really appreciate this, and thank you for everything you're doing to archive our heritage and our memory. And free Palestine every day.
Free Palestine. Tam, would you like to... Over to you, Tam.
I would just like to continue what Susan said about how archiving is part of agriculture, it's part of tatriz, it's part of like intangible cultural heritage, it's part of the cooking. And I think that when archivists limit themselves to documents, as like that's the thing that we're going to archive about Palestine. If they do archive Palestine, you're limiting what is the full scope of Palestinian heritage. So thank you for ending on that note, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you so much. And Tam, always wonderful to collaborate. Again, please sign the statement, or at least read it. There's a lot of calls to action and very specific ways that you as archivists and archival institutions can make a huge difference in this moment. And there's hundreds of your colleagues who've signed it. So this is really a movement, and it's really momentum. And the only last thing I'd like to end with is saying that all eyes on Gaza, everybody.
Jamila, sorry, the link isn't, the link that was posted isn't working. It's a LinkedIn link, not the petition.
Somebody's saying that, eh?
Oh wait. Oh, never mind. My bad. I'm wrong.
No.
It worked. Thank you.
As long as it's working. Thank you so much.
Now, thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Keep an eye out for our next event. Take care. Goodbye.
Goodbye.